Massachusetts 127, the Shaw Road, the 9 o'clock bus Sunday morning still goes up from Boston through Swampscott to Marblehead, just as though there'd never been a war. By November, the leaves are turning brown. It's time for a frost. Sundays, the Massachusetts towns are still quiet, as they've been in the Sabbath for 300 years. Once in a while nowadays, a sailor gets home to Marblehead. Wounded men or just plain lucky men, like these, whose ship came in for overhaul and gave them leave. Yes, every so often, the old Massachusetts white frame houses are astir, the way they used to be, preparing a Marblehead welcome for a returning sailor, like Walter Burke, the sailor with the bag. After 20 months at sea talking about it, Walter's coming home and bringing his shipmate, Bert Greenwood, back to meet his family and his girl, to see the town where they say the U.S. Navy was born. That's Mrs. Burke, Walter's mother. This is what's happened in Marblehead for 300 years, whenever its men have come back from the sea. That's Walter's father, shaving himself at 9:50 sharp, just as he's been doing Sundays for 38 years, on schedule for church. Because in Marblehead, every Sunday is and always has been the Lord's Day, rain or shine, whether a sailor's come home or not. And every Sunday, the church bells still ring across the bay, and his family get on their coats and hats and take him to service. That's old St. Michael's. Hasn't changed much outside since it was built in 1714, or inside either, except for the chandelier, which went up later, in 1732. "15 generations of choir boys have walked up that aisle in their white surplices. Walter was once one himself.
When young men appear in church these days, they are usually young men in uniform. It is always a great satisfaction to have them here, of course, and particularly so when they are those of our very own. This morning, as you see, it is Walter Burke, back from 2 years in the Pacific. These young men may think sometimes when they are away that we have forgotten them, but one doesn't forget the sort of young man who is doing the sort of things that these young men are doing for us."
Including Father Murray, 33 rectors of St. Michael's have greeted returning seamen from that pulpit. 6 of those rectors were before the Revolution, in the days when Marblehead rivaled Boston as a port. Men off the sloops and frigates swapped sea yarns along these wharves.
Well, how are you, Captain?
Oh, Walter. How are they going?
Oh, pretty good. How's it going with you?
It's going to be great to have you back.
I guess you kind of missed the boys, huh?
We certainly do. We're all looking forward for the day when they come back.
There's some of the boys in the Army, too, aren't there?
Oh, yes. Of course, the Marblehead boys would favor the Navy, but of course, in the draft, they got them in the Army. Curtis Hamilton, Purple, Sanborn, and Polly boys, and Bogus boys, all brothers. Took quite a load out of us, between 1,200 and 1,300.
Well, Captain, how about going out with you next week?
Well, you come down. You don't have to come down so early, you know. Used to go from 3 to 3:30, but now they leave in about 7 in the morning. So that isn't too early for you.
Yeah.
When he welcomes old Marbleheaders nowadays, the captain's favorite topic usually is the story of the Cruiser Marblehead, which glorified the traditions of her Navy in the Java Sea in 1942. And a sailor just returned will listen. even if he knows this will be part of his first day home, a Massachusetts Sunday dinner.
O Lord, we thank Thee for the food which is set before us. May it strengthen our bodies and minds for Thy service. Amen.
Cranberries and giblet gravy and homemade rolls and a family and a girl. Yes, the welcome for a sailor coming home to an old sea town in Massachusetts is still pretty much the same. But the towns have changed. There's a war on. For Walter's father, too. For they're building Navy ships again in Massachusetts, 7 days a week. Mr. Burke helps build them. In the yards, where the wooden keels of four-masted fighting ships were laid in 1774, there's riveting and welding now. LSTs and carriers and DEs for 1945. But not all the yards are old. When Walter went off to sea, there were mud flats and a tide wash here near Hingham. Now, 35,000 Massachusetts men and women work 7 days a week and rivet up an LST in 40 days per ship and launch 3 ships a week. A day, the clatter keeps up as steel plates are welded and forged into Navy ships by people who 2 years ago had never seen a blowtorch. That's Mr. Burke's crew, a Springfield farmer, a Worcester tailor, a Roxborough businessman, a Boston chef, a Cape Cod gardener, a Boston hairdresser, a schoolgirl and a paratrooper's wife, a concert singer. This is their Sabbath, and has been ever since the shipyard opened. But only when somebody's got a sailor in tow do they stop to watch a launching. There's no champagne or whistle blowing, just a schedule, made up a year ago, that number 959 will go down the ways at 3:36 when the tide's in. And on the button, she quietly begins her first trip down the ways. She's an LST, one more craft to add to a long list of ships who first tasted salt in Massachusetts waters.
In the winter of 1941, these Moscow buildings were held in the gun sights of a German army that had surrounded the Russian capital. But this is a fine day in the summer, 3 years later. There are Germans outside of Moscow again, 57,000 prisoners of war. They are Germans captured by the Russian armies in the battles of Minsk, Obrisk, and Vitebsk. They are the living remains of the famous 27th Panzer Division, the German 9th and 4th Armies, the crack 45th and 65th Infantry Divisions, the 43rd Panzer, and nearly 50 other German divisions broken in combat. There are enough of them here to seize the city of Moscow, but they've lost their arms and their will to fight. The smell of battle is still on their clothes, for it was only a few weeks ago, and in some cases a few days ago, that these men were killing Russians. They are going today to the rail yards to begin their ride to a prison camp. This last humiliating march of their retreat takes them across the city of Moscow. Their officers continue to lead them in defeat. You can see from their faces that these generals are men from the old German army. Men who had been told that they would one day walk through the streets of Moscow. They had not been told that the streets would be so quiet, or that their destination would be prison. It can be said that the sight of a German soldier calls up more bitter memories for a Russian than for any other people. This ghost of an army moves quietly, and as the people watch, a second and larger army seems to walk beside them. The army of the millions of Russians killed by the Germans. The army of the brothers and fathers and sons of the people of Moscow. There are those the Germans starved and those the Germans poisoned. There are those the Germans killed in combat and those who had the life beaten out of them with whips. There are those the Germans burned and those the Germans shot. Those the Germans tortured and those the Germans hung. Walking beside these troops, for the people of Moscow, are the legions of their dead. It took the 57,000 Germans a long time to cross the city, and water trucks followed them, washing away the last trace of their march. The people of Moscow had seen a great German army, but they had not forgotten that a greater German army of 6.5 million men still fought savagely in the field and would have to be defeated before any parade through their streets meant victory.
Hi, fellows. Well, here we go again, with our first request coming from Private Anthony Luca, 670th Topographical Company, somewhere in the Southwest Pacific. Private Luca writes, nearly 2 years ago, I closed my business establishment, Tracy Bowling Alleys, Tracy Boulevard, Wallingford, Connecticut, and entered the service. My son was 3 years old then. The picture I'm most anxious to see is my son rolling a ball down the alley.
That sign should look familiar, Private Luca. And so should these citizens of Wallingford going through your front door. And here's a very special citizen, Private, your wife, who asked us to tell you that business is fine. She's made a lot of improvements in the alley since you left. Your son Bob said you wouldn't recognize him. He told us he's grown almost 2 inches and has gained 7 pounds. Looks pretty good, doesn't he? He still can't hold the ball in one hand like his dad, but the pins go down just the same. Bob wanted to know if there are any alleys where you are. He says he's keeping in practice so he can take you on when you come home. So get set for that championship match, Private Luca.
P5 George Jenkins, somewhere in Italy, says he's heard about the cigarette shortage back home and wants to know what the folks are doing for smokes.
One of the things they're doing, Corporal Jenkins, is going without, with most of the shelves throughout the country as bare as Mother Hubbard's. There are half a dozen reasons. Poor tobacco crops, manpower shortages, more American smoking than ever before. Standard brands are scarce, so people, when they can get them, settle for anything from Turkish tobacco to cigarettes that taste like a mixture of corn silk and peanut shells. Or, nowadays, you may find a lady spending as much time choosing a briar or a corncob as she used to spend picking a new hat. Now, here's another solution for those who must get their daily quota of nicotine. It's all very simple. You just take a 5-cent package of good old Bull Durham, a thin piece of paper, carefully held in the right hand, and then with a little care, oops, madam, that's no place to keep tobacco.
5 GIs somewhere in Belgium say they've seen hundreds of beautiful pinup girls, but think it's a shame that the queen of them all has been forgotten. To quote, how about flashing that grand old lady of freedom across the screen, the Statue of Liberty?
There's the lady you want to see, Privates Weiss, Pictorial, Sirek, Zapola, and Santa. She's still there in the harbor, still carrying the torch for you and the millions of others she sent overseas to do a job. Lately, she's been dolled up a bit and given a whole new system of floodlights. But they don't go on until the day Germany and Japan surrender. Until then, she thanks with quiet pride those who gave their lives so that the liberty she symbolizes for all Americans may live.